Dr. Louise Rice is opening envelopes in her 3-story home in St. Louis, Missouri. Inside are baby teeth. She's convinced local parents to have their children send her their lost teeth, and in return, she'll send them a button reading, "I gave my tooth to science." It's 1959. The baby tooth survey will outgrow Dr. Rice's house to a collection including hundreds of thousands of children's teeth from around the United States. And she'll discover something about the teeth of children born during the era of atmospheric nuclear testing that will make an impact around the world. They all contain high levels of strontium-90, a radioactive isotope. A remarkable film comes out that same year, On the Beach, directed by Stanley Kramer and based on the novel by Nevil Shute.
And they were wrong. We fought, we expunged them.
Nuclear war has devastated the Earth. A group of survivors wait for a vast cloud of radiation to reach them in the southern hemisphere, carried on air currents from the devastated north.
Interesting result that the background level of radiation in this very room is 9 times what it was a year ago. Don't you know that? 9 times. We're all doomed, you know. Doomed by the air we're about to breathe.
The fear of nuclear fallout is growing all around the world. In response to public and scientific pressure, the Soviet Union and the United States have suspended their tests of atomic bombs. It is only temporary, while negotiators are trying to work out a permanent treaty. The arrival of John F. Kennedy in the White House brings new hope for an agreement. But by the time President Kennedy and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev meet in Vienna in 1961, progress is still on a knife edge.
I'm Maxwell Kennedy, nephew of John F. Kennedy.
And I'm Nina Khrushcheva, great-granddaughter of Nikita Khrushchev.
Episode 2, King of Bombs. It begins politely. Vienna, early June 1961. The only meeting between Premier Khrushchev and President Kennedy as leaders of their countries. It lasts 2 days.
So this is the seating chart for the dinner in Vienna.
This is very cool.
It is very cool.
So it's a long rectangular table.
Yeah. Frau Kennedy, she is the guest of honor. Here is Gromyko. Here's Rusk. Here's Rusk.
Those are 2 Cold Warriors facing each other for the whole dinner.
As he heads for the American embassy and the first rounds of discussion with Khrushchev. The talks go on for 2 days.
Put yourself in a position of any American or West European and look at the photos of Khrushchev and Kennedy in Vienna, and you will see a slim, a young, a sporty man and overweight and bald representative of the Soviet Union.
So this is my favorite picture,
great.
Right?
Your grandmother looks a little bit charmed. She doesn't look entirely immune to the charms of President Kennedy.
She was totally not immune.
The reality is that actually Khrushchev is full of energy. When Kennedy is crippled, really, he's taken all sorts of medication and he is not in best shape at all. That's about the images. That's about the photos and the reality behind them.
Problems that separate 2 widely divergent ideologies threshed out for 15 hours during Mr. Kennedy's Vienna mission.
Khrushchev has an agenda. Top of it is Berlin, a city divided and encircled by socialist East Germany. More and more people are fleeing Soviet East Berlin for the West.
West Berlin is a democratic island in a sea of communism. And during the meeting, Khrushchev threatens to cut off Allied access to the people there through a treaty with East Germany. Kennedy is startled by Khrushchev's combative tone and unsettled by the threat.
Kennedy fears that if Khrushchev imposes a new blockade on Berlin, that this will lead to war because the Soviet and East German military forces completely outnumber any American forces that would be involved in transportation of supplies.
Kennedy tells Khrushchev the United States won't abandon the people of West Berlin because we've made a pledge to be there. He reminds Khrushchev that during the Second World War, we fought our way there, although our losses may not have been as high as the USSR's. Instead of peace, they're now talking about confrontation.
There still appears to be sharp disagreement on Berlin, nuclear testing, and Soviet demands for veto rights in international discussions.
The talks are unraveling. Khrushchev is furious and reminds Kennedy of Soviet losses during the Second World War. 20 million citizens. They too fought to be in Berlin.
Khrushchev thinks he can bully Kennedy, and he sort of blusters and threatens implicitly to use nuclear weapons. And even his vice president, Lyndon Johnson, says, the poor little fellow was pushed around by this Russian leader.
It is the way he's holding onto the corner of the seat does make me think that his back is hurting.
His back is hurting.
They're at loggerheads, and both maintaining their positions over Berlin. President Kennedy asks to extend the summit, so he's clear what Khrushchev wants. The Soviet premier threatens him. If the United States insists on its rights in Berlin and violates East German borders, Khrushchev says force will be met by force.
And Kennedy warns that this could mean war. And Khrushchev basically brushes it off and says, hey, then it'll be war. It'll be your responsibility. And the meeting ends, famously with Kennedy saying, it'll be a cold winter. And he's very shaken up by this.
Kennedy comes out of the Vienna summit saying it's the toughest thing that's ever happened to him in his life, and that includes his experience in World War II. Kennedy has to find a way of showing that he's not going to be pushed around and bullied by this Soviet leader. I think that's very much the background to the psychological drama that happens during the missile crisis.
It's 7 weeks after Vienna. President Kennedy makes his way on crutches to the White House.
I want to talk frankly with you tonight about the first steps that we shall take.
He talks to the TV audience about the difficult summit, Russia's military buildup, and the situation in Berlin.
Kennedy has to compensate somehow. He has to act tough, and his way to do that is to go to Congress and ask for more funding for armaments, to increase the number of men and women in uniform in the U.S. Armed Forces. So that is a sort of a defensive tactic, both when it comes to domestic politics and international politics.
I am tomorrow requesting the Congress an additional $3,247 million of appropriations for the armed forces.
So he is there spanned on defense.
And he tells the public to prepare to build fallout shelters.
To identify and mark space in existing structures, public and private, that could be used for fallout shelters in case of attack. To stock those shelters with food, water, first aid kits, and other minimum essentials for our survival.
After Vienna, the world can see the difficult relations between President Kennedy and Premier Khrushchev. In public, communication between the two leaders has become aggressive. The situation seems to be escalating. But behind the scenes, in private, another relationship has been developing. At this point, I need to introduce you to my father, Senator Robert F. Kennedy.
What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black.
He's only 35 in 1961. He's the president's younger brother. The two men are quite different in their approaches, but they have a deep, absolute trust in each other. President Kennedy appoints my father Attorney General. They are criticized for nepotism, but it becomes one of the most successful working relationships of the American presidency. And my father will play a leading role in the crisis to come.
Jack is very rational and charming, but there's a kind of coldness to him, an aloofness. Bobby is hotter, meaner, angrier, but also more loving, kinder, gentler, all those things. And both sides, both the hot and the cold, exist in Bobby Kennedy. They can be in contradiction, they can get him into trouble, but they can be extremely useful.
Really useful when it comes to negotiations.
The Kennedys like to operate on two channels. A public channel, a diplomacy through the State Department and through our ambassadors, but they also like private channels. They like back channels as a way of getting things done, to achieve things that can't be done publicly. So early in the Kennedy administration, Robert Kennedy, who's the Attorney General, doesn't even have a national security hat, he strikes up a relationship with a Soviet agent, Georgy Bolshakov, a military intelligence agent who's in Washington, and they become kind of friends. Robert Kennedy has Georgy Bolshakov out to his house out in Virginia, and they go swimming and they have drinks together, and they try to establish a personal relationship.
This is Georgy Bolshakov, who was part of the story as well, right?
Where's
this
Bolshakov?
This one.
That's him?
Right. This is him. Bolshakov was my father's boss, because he was a journalist, technically.
Really?
Yep. Bolshakov was a journalist for TASS agency in America, and so they worked together as, I assumed, spies.
You never met him, right?
I think I met him. I actually have letters to my parents from him. So I've known of him long before he started cropping up in stories about Cuban Missile Crisis. But Bolshakov was a liaison between your father and the Soviets, correct?
Yes, that's what I understand. For sure he was. He joked about being a spy. Yes, I'm here to spy on you. And they knew he was there to spy on them, but he was also charming. And I think it's not that dangerous to have a spy around if everyone knows they're a spy, as long as you...
And they admit that they're spies, and so you don't say extra things.
He wasn't a double agent. He was very clearly a spy.
Late summer in East Berlin. People are woken up by the rumbling of heavy machinery in the early hours. They look out of their windows to see workers digging up the streets. They're clearing the way for huge piles of barbed wire to be strung across the divide between eastern and western parts of the city. Armed troops guard the crossing points. It's August 13th, 1961.
Made even more tragic by rumors that by tonight no West Berliners will be allowed into the eastern zone. All links between the two sides are closed, even the underground, which used to be a route to freedom for so many East Berliners.
Many East Berliners are rushing for the exit. Khrushchev agrees to a proposal by the East German leader Walter Ulbricht to keep them in. They will build a wall. The alternative option, going to war over West Berlin, was not a gamble he was prepared to take.
The big question that Khrushchev was asking himself at that time was, would the Americans go to war for the sake of West Berlin? A nuclear war that could potentially destroy civilization as we know it, that could destroy the United States itself? And the answer to this question was no, they will not do that. It's crazy. It's insane to do this. When they debated this question in the Presidium, which later became the Politburo of the Soviet Communist Party, Khrushchev made the following estimate. He said the chances of a war over Berlin are about 5%. But then, because the stakes were so high in this, he just wasn't sure whether he wanted to push Kennedy to test his resolve on this.
Khrushchev doesn't want to start a war. He can't wait any longer over Berlin. So he orders the wall to be built.
Only a few yards from freedom, people watched gravely from flats as the sealing off went on. Then a child's kite skidded and twirled through the stormy sky, almost a symbol of freedom in this far from free city.
At Friedrichstrasse railway station in East Berlin, on the morning of August 13th, 1961, the waiting hall overflows with thousands of people trying to get out. An elderly woman approaches one of the black-suited transport police who are blocking access to the trains and asks when the next one is due for West Berlin. That is all over, he tells her. You're in a mousetrap now. President Kennedy can't defend the freedom of East Berliners, and his reaction to the Berlin Wall is initially one of relief. He tells an aide on the day the border is sealed, "It's not a very nice solution, but a wall is a hell of a lot better than war."
Since the launch of the Sputnik satellite in 1957, there's been a growing perception in the United States of a missile gap, a fear that the Soviet Union is developing intercontinental ballistic missiles in greater numbers than the United States. Khrushchev has famously claimed that he's producing missiles like sausages.
Nikita Khrushchev was a master of the bluff, right?
It was his original job, as you remember. He was a propagandist at the beginning of his career.
But bluff is part of the repertoire. There are also other professional requirements, but he was much better, I would say, at bluffing than others, because his bluff was believable.
It was?
People believed, maybe not about communism, but certainly about the potential nuclear threat.
When he was saying that we make rockets like sausages.
Right. There were no more missile sausages in the Soviet Union than there were real sausages. The country was in the middle of the food crisis. Go and figure out whether that was the case or not.
The United States does figure it out by sending satellites and spy planes over the Soviet Union. They discover it's a bluff.
The Soviet Union has a very limited number of ballistic missiles that can reach the territory of the United States, and it takes forever to fuel those missiles on the launch pads, which means they're sitting ducks for the American bombers, for the American attack. But the public didn't know that.
The USSR is a superpower in economic trouble by 1961. The R-7, the generation of rockets that took Sputnik to space, is old technology now.
So by the early 1960s, they only just have a few of these, and they're based up in the northern part of the Soviet Union, but it's not necessarily the most reliable deterrent. It's a gigantic thing that took a long time to fuel up.
Khrushchev makes a decision in July, soon after the Vienna summit. He announces it at the end of August, as the barbed wire of the Berlin Wall is being fortified with cement. He will resume nuclear testing.
And he decided to renew atomic testing to show the Soviet Union was a true nuclear power. A lot of people didn't like that. Jawaharlal Nehru, the Prime Minister of India, came to Moscow pleading with Khrushchev not to renew nuclear testing. Khrushchev said, "No, we're not pacifists, we're Bolsheviks. We will show the world what we're capable of."
President Kennedy wakes from an afternoon nap on September 1st to be told about the first test in the atmosphere of a nuclear bomb in almost 3 years. He groans and says something unrepeatable.
When Khrushchev starts setting off these massive explosions, Kennedy and McNamara decide enough of this.
McNamara is Robert McNamara, President Kennedy's Secretary of Defense. By now it's clear to the Kennedy administration that there is no missile gap after all. The United States is edging ahead with advanced technology. They have more and better missiles.
McNamara's deputy, Roswell Gilpatrick, gives a speech in mid-October 1961, essentially saying that even if the Soviet Union launched a surprise attack against the United States with nuclear weapons, the U.S. could still retaliate overwhelmingly and destroy the Soviet Union. And this was a way of telling the world that, to use the cliche, the emperor has no clothes. That, in fact, the Soviets are inferior in terms of nuclear striking power, not the United States.
Focal point of rising tension on the borderline between East and West Berlin. Behind me here, less than 100 yards from the muzzles of 4 American Patton tanks, there are 6 Russian heavy tanks squatting ominously.
In Berlin, the situation escalates. The city has become the fault line for the Cold War and for President Kennedy and Premier Khrushchev's relationship. Week by week, the tension's increasing through 1961. Now, in late October, there's a confrontation. With the wall up, American General Lucius Clay wants to enforce American rights to move freely throughout the whole city. Since an altercation at the border, he's been sending tanks to the crossing point known as Checkpoint Charlie to escort civilian cars into East Berlin. And so far, they've been allowed through. But on October 27th, there's a shift.
The Soviets moved their own tanks to the area. By early evening on October 27th, 2 columns of tanks with live ammunition face each other, less than 100 meters from the demarcation line. The whole city is nervous.
This is the first time that forces of the 2 wartime allies, the Soviet Union and the United States, now the world's biggest powers, have met in direct and hostile confrontation. A small miscalculation on either side could lead to war. The tanks remain in that standoff, guns pointed at each other throughout the night and into the next day. But negotiations are going on behind the scenes.
One Soviet tank is the first to draw back, 5 meters. An American tank does the same. Another 5 meters back on both sides. And again, and again.
A few minutes ago, the tanks pulled out. We still haven't found out why, and with their massive guns pointing towards the sky, they moved off across left on our front and down the sector border.
The orders to pull back have come from the top, from Khrushchev and Kennedy themselves.
But the terms have been discussed through a back channel. My father, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and his Soviet contact, Georgy Bolshakov. Bolshakov is the fastest and most direct line to Khrushchev at a dangerous moment.
In that same week in Moscow, Khrushchev's attention is on a momentous meeting, the 22nd Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. It's a triumph for him, and to round it off, he has planned a display of his and Soviet power, a nuclear test of the Tsar bomb.
The preparation of that sort of bomb was something that was in the works for a long period of time. The dates of the Congress, that is also known ahead of time. It is a coronation of Nikita Khrushchev as the leader of the communist world on the one hand, and it's also the signal that the Soviet Union arrived as an equal power to the United States.
The test has been designed to coincide with the conclusion of the Congress. But it also comes after months of building tension between Khrushchev and Kennedy. The myth of the missile gap, the perception that the Soviet Union has more nuclear weapons than the USA, has been exposed by the Americans. And it comes 3 days after the standoff in Berlin.
So when we talk about why he detonated the Tsar bomb, this massive, massive bomb at 57 megatons, the biggest weapon that was ever detonated. By doing that, it's, Khrushchev's kind of way of showing that the initiative is still on his side.
On October 30th, a plane carries the Tsar bomb over the Arctic Circle. It's a hydrogen bomb with an uncontrolled, self-sustaining chain reaction. It is detonated in the air, thousands of meters above the remote Novaya Zemlya archipelago. "800 kilometers away, the flare from the explosion is visible. It scorches entirely the land beneath. A seismic wave in the Earth's crust circles the globe 3 times. At almost 4,000 times the strength of the Hiroshima bomb, it's the biggest bomb ever exploded.